know him, but also a fantastic political campaign.
Think back to 10 years ago when Blair decided to go along with the invasion of Iraq. We now know from the head of MI5 that he was told in the days before that by taking part in the invasion, this will make Britain a target for terrorism. And he has gone through endless denials. You see it again and again. It's nothing to do with that. Terrorism is, it's a problem with Islam and so on. And we also now know that in the immediate few days before the invasion, President Bush was being briefed by their foreign office, their State Department. The official said there is a danger that the invasion may trigger conflict between Shia and Sunnis. And Bush said, what are Shia and Sunnis? Very funny, but by God, this has now come true with real vengeance. There's been a real division. We see the horrors coming out of Syria. We see the Saudis pushing covertly for action against Iran. You've got Israel calling for attacks on Iran because of its nuclear program. Covertly, the Saudis are doing exactly the same thing, and that reflects that Shia-Sunni tension. I don't think, though, that if we could parachute back to 10 years ago, any of us would have believed it was going to be as bad for as long. I assume by now we've moved on to some other conflict, not that America and Britain would only just be extricating themselves. And of course, what we now see as well is the backlash for this, because it's gone on. 10 years of horrific crimes being reported by the occupation troops, torturing, killing prisoners that they've captured, a whole degradation of society in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. And what is quite remarkable about that is that it festers and it builds up. No one should be surprised. And it eventually helps, I believe, to trigger the sort of events we saw in Woolwich and the sort of events we saw in Boston. And we've actually got to be honest about this. You can't invade other people's country without having some sort of blowback. It's quite, I've done quite a few interviews over the last few weeks, as people do 10 years on and so on. And again, interviewers separate the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan from the terrorist response that has come from that. I remember sitting in my office at City Hall just in middle of 2005, being briefed by Stella Remington, who was then the head of MI5, and I was saying, because it was 4 years after 9/11, I've been amazed that we've got away without a terrorist attack here in London. And she said, but we aren't going, it won't continue like that. It's incredibly dangerous out there. And of course, the background behind all of this as well is you've got papers like The Telegraph and The Mail, columnists like Gilligan, driving an Islamophobic agenda, which has helped to demonise Muslims living here in our community. And the simple fact, Tory party's had its part in all of that. Hammond has made some horrendous speeches that have stirred up hatred against Muslims. And it's, not just me as a lefty saying this. Former Prime Minister of Norway, after Anders Breivik actually took his massacre, complained that the language of David Cameron in demonising Islam may have been a factor in pushing Anders Breivik over into this horrific mass murder. We know from the very long text, not text in the electronic sense, but in terms of the hundreds of pages he left and was discovered and since been published. All the way through that, as he justifies what he's going to do, he's quoting the Daily Mail, Melanie Phillips in her book, London Astana. I don't know if any of you saw Melanie Phillips on Question Time last week, But she suddenly went completely off message on all of this and started shouting at the audience, saying, because somebody had said something remarkably mild, like, isn't it good that a moderate candidate has been elected as the next president of Iran? And she just turned to this person and said, don't be ridiculous in this. What the Iranians want, they're Shias. They want a nuclear holocaust, the destruction of all life on earth, so Allah will return and separate the good from the bad and so on. I just thought this woman's gone completely mad. But she's got a platform in the Daily Mail and on the electronic version of the Daily Mail, which something like about 200 million people around the world access and read. This stuff is poisoning the nature of our society. And what I thought was particularly good in terms of the way London has responded after the attacks in July 2005 was we had at the Met about 2 instances of slogans being daubed on mosques. But I don't recall a single incident of a physical attack by any Londoner against someone who seemed to be Muslim. If you go back to 9/11, there was a much larger range of incidents, and one Sikh taxi driver was savagely beaten and lost the ability to walk. He was beaten up down in Kingston. Equally this time we've seen a real surge of these incidents, and I think part of that is that increasingly politicians aren't prepared to challenge Islamophobia, aren't prepared to point to the fact you can't be surprised that terrorists will take action, whether it's in Boston or whether it's in Woolwich, as long as the West continues to invade and occupy countries in the Middle East, and to do it so obviously because we wish to control the oil. I remember when Tony Blair was desperately trying to persuade the American President Clinton to be involved in sending troops to Kosovo. They had no interest in that. There was no oil in Kosovo. All of this has been about oil. It's been about oil for 80 years, since Britain and France carved up the Middle East, taking chunks each to ensure they got control of oil supplies. It was there when the elected government in Iran, in 1952, nationalised their oil. Prime Minister Mossadegh, openly elected in free election, social democrat, he nationalised the oil. Only 16% of the profits from the oil was going to the Iranian people. Half that, twice that amount, was going to the British Treasury. He nationalised it. What happened? MI6 and the CIA intervened to overthrow that government and install a dictator in the form of the Shah. And can we then be surprised if there's a strongly anti-Western backlash that leads in 1979 to Ayatollah Khomeini coming to power? I just sit back and think, when you look at the cost of the war in Iraq has cost about $1,000 billion. The war in Iran has cost about, the war in Afghanistan has cost about $1,000 billion. If we just honestly paid a fair price for the bloody oil, it most probably would have been cheaper in the long run, let alone the horrific fatalities and casualties that we've seen. So we've got a right to demand that those in power in Britain and those who run our media start to be honest and end the double standards. I am sick and there's a 3-page analysis of where Iran's nuclear program is in The Economist, and big debate about to what extent you need bombing, how long a bombing would you need America to lead an invasion of Iran. How can anybody in the world expect there not to be anger at the West when there's this constant pressure from Israel and constant right-wing people in America talking about the need to deal with Iran because it's coming close to getting nuclear weapons, when since 1965 Israel has had nuclear weapons, has a stockpile of 200 nuclear weapons, and has continued to refuse and to even admit to that. It's that double standard that fuels the anger that we saw in Boston, that we saw in Woolwich. It's the double standard of invading other people's countries and assuming somehow they should be grateful for it. I think we might be a bit offended if it happened here. We've got to stop intervening in the Middle East. It has been nothing but nearly a century of disaster. It has given no real benefit to the people there, and I don't believe it's given any benefit to the people here. Only the oil corporations with their vast profits are the only ones that have benefited from this strategy. It's time we ended it. Thank you very much.